Hi and welcome to this live Q&A session on developer productivity. I hope all of you are doing fine and I'm looking forward to answer some more questions, and I hope we have some live interaction again and some questions during the show. So you can ask questions in this Slido link that I posted into the chat, and you can either write in that chat or using the Slido we will cover the live Q&As, and I hope that's going to be fun again. Let's see how much content we have, whether it's 45 minutes or just less, and having some chat and hopefully interaction. I'll also have some polls for you, or one poll for you that I'm interested in, and especially with the content of being productive as a developer. I also want to or got some questions about already about the current situation and how to deal with that best, and maybe you can share some points of view regarding that as well. So actually we can have a look into the first. Let me share my screen. So like this, that's the GitHub issue again, where you can post some questions in, or now probably during the show. So we have some Slido system here. You can ask your questions there. And yeah, I got something by email directly again. So actually I want to start with the second one, because I think that's quite an interesting one right now. And it's definitely a valid question. About this current situation, can you share what has changed from your way of working and especially your productivity? So it's regarding this coronavirus and also all of the political issues we have worldwide right now. Do you have some tips for those who are still struggling with all what's going on? Yes. So what has changed from my way of working? Actually, quite a bit, because usually, you probably know this, I'm a developer advocate. I spend quite a lot of time traveling around and speaking at conferences in person, which is a lot of time consumption there. But also I tried to get better and better in the last years to just be somewhat productive on the road. So actually what changed, a bunch of things. All of these conferences so far got canceled, all of the ones that are in person, and that is still the case. So all of the ones that are lined up next are online. And so it was quite a big impact for me. And also I noticed actually that I got somewhat more productive just because of the time I have available. Here I'm now based in Vienna, and because of the situation also I'm kind of stuck, so that's just where I spent the last weeks and all of this. And I live alone, so I can just happily or productively work on things and just focus on something, which is of course good and bad, because at some point you actually just have to balance. And I said this at the video course, that you just have to care about your work environments, and also caring about taking a rest, right? So it does matter which environment you're in, and of course mental health is a big issue as well. So for me, actually, it was mostly trying to not work too much, or not trying to be too productive, because that doesn't scale well, especially if you're already working in a very quiet and secluded environment where nobody disturbs you, because nobody can disturb you in this situation. Then you're already very productive, but then from my point of view, even 4, 5, 6 hours a day are more than enough. And then afterwards, your energy is like low, and then you have to do a break. You have to switch your environments or do some context switch, which in this situation actually was very hard. So I just worked a lot because also of lack of alternatives. I tried to educate myself a lot with watching video courses, with reading books, and then also at some point, of course, doing other stuff not related to IT, to just keep that balance somewhat. And that's basically most of that. Then in the beginning, it was a lot of issues with just not trying to check the news and political things all the time, right? Because otherwise you just get crazy. So actually I found out once again that programming is also a very nice way to distract yourself, which is good. So these were kind of my findings. So in terms of productivity, for me, it was once again important to keep some kind of balance, right? So that's pretty much that. Let's see if we have some questions or something going on already. Also, you can feel free to say hi in the chat and let me know if there are some other issues with audio, something like that. It's always good to hear just back if everything works, or if you to hear some ping. So hi to the world, or maybe you can also say where you're located right now and what's the situation for you. And let me just activate the first poll actually, because I'm interested in what you like, especially what you're struggling with in this current situation with regards to being productive, right? So is it, like the more mental health type of things, like worrying about the situation and the news, or distractions when working from home, maybe you have little kids, or if you cannot work properly at home, or if you actually are more productive than before, maybe also a little bit of all of it, but what's like the most struggling for you. So I'll be interested in that. And yes, so let's continue with the second or first question here, which is a little bit more technical. In your video course and resources, you say that we should spend as much time on the keyboard as possible. However, in the browser, I mostly use the mouse, and I'm not sure if I'd be more effective with the keyboard. What are your thoughts on this? Yes, so I covered this in the video course, and actually, I wanted to open this link as well. Effective Developer Podcast. I also covered this in a podcast that I put out on the Effective Developer, which is literally about this topic, where we go a little bit deeper into specific subtopics, also have some background and some even psychological background on like things like flow and stuff like that. And what I would say from my point of view now is that the reason why in general you're more productive with the keyboard and you're very effective with the keyboard is because of what is called context switches. So you're not switching a lot of context from your keyboard hand position to the mouse and back. So that's first of all a good thing. And we as developers, we tend to type things, right? So we at some point we need to use the keyboard. And then if you switch back and forth, and especially where your mouse is located and how quickly you can switch even without looking, that just depends how much of a context switch it is, even if it's just like a few milliseconds, but it does make a difference, mostly also mentally. And then with the browser or with any usage, I would say it boils down to if you have a limited set of actions. So what does this mean? If you say, okay, I have a few commands or things that I do all the time, right? So I write my code and then I execute unit tests or build my project or redeploy or some action that you want to trigger. And these are limited, right? These are not like thousands. These are a few things that you do all the time. And then it really makes sense to use keyboard shortcuts for them and just in general stay on the keyboard so you don't have to switch, right? You're just typing and you're coding. You might switch to editor, you're coding again, and then you do something to run the tests, right? And if you don't trigger that with the mouse, that's just faster. And now in your browser, well, it depends, because in a website, you don't necessarily have this limited set of actions, because you go to a website and now you may be familiar with GitHub, but you go to a new website like this one and you don't quite know how it looks like, right? You don't know where this play button is, or you have to do kind of like exploratory usage of this. So actually the mouse might make more sense in your browser. Actually, what you can do as well, you can have some like special plugins that I think I showed before in the past. So for example, I use something like this where I have some overview with, for example, if I want to go there, now I press F and then S for just like switching this, which might help. And there's some scrolling alternatives and things like that. But what I would suggest is to just use a combination with your two hands. So where if you're a right-handed person, if you use the mouse in the right hand, then with the left hand, what you can do is to at least use some shortcuts. For example, switching tabs back and forth, like Control Tab or then Control W for closing tab, Control Shift T for reopen tab, and or Control T. I mean, these are the shortcuts in Chromium or in Chrome browser. But that might be, you know, like a helpful combination, so you can use both the mouse with one hand and then the keyboard in the other hand. So which is probably a little bit more, you know, like best of both worlds. But in general, I would say, okay, it depends on this, how many different or unpredictable set of actions you have. So, you know, what you actually do if you want to click around, or if you know, navigate an unknown site, then the mouse makes more sense because you literally point and click. Otherwise, maybe, you know, like keyboard things. So in general, that's also one of the reasons why I'm actually more a fan of the command line and of coding and staying in an environment where I can fully interact using the keyboard, right? Where it's not like a what you see is what you get, or a GUI editor. For, you know, website, this might or might not make sense. But I think that's somewhat, these are my thoughts on this. So actually I use this type of plugin where you can go to a site and then just, you know, like press an overlay quite a lot. Also, they are also optimized for the left hand. So if you use like F, that's on the left hand, and then all of the initial keys here are also starting with the left hand keys, which are close on the home row. So you can actually use this combination with, I think that's called either Vimium or Surfing Keys, this current plugin that I'm using. So it depends what you prefer. And that's, yeah, pretty much it on that front. So, oh yeah, hi, thanks for the writing into the chat. Greece, Romania, south of Russia. That's awesome. So I'm happy. And yeah, let's see what our polls are doing and the updates. Yes, so distractions are more productive than before. Yes, same for me for now. Let's see when the results are coming in. So that's definitely the case. But yeah, I also notice it really like depends how you handle with that. Also, you know, how much you're personally affected with the situation. I guess what we were talking about before. Yes, so these are my thoughts on what we just covered with using the keyboard in the browser. Then again, I'll talk a little bit about this in this podcast. So if you're not listening to that, you can listen it for free on Spotify and a bunch of platforms, or like directly on the site on Anchor FM. I'll post the link also afterwards, but it's the Effective Developer. You can search for it or see it on my blog. And yes, and I have another productivity update since the last time, or since I think posted something the last time about this. So actually I got a new keyboard. So again, about these keyboards, and I said this in the course, I don't want to do any advertising. It's literally just my own thoughts and what I'm using, and also what I kind of think makes sense. And it's also a little bit about the current situation involved. So what I got myself, and this is really not a cheap one, but it's really, you know, a nice one, and I have it in front of me. So it's a nicely produced keyboard, Ultimate Hacking Keyboard. What it does, it is a split keyboard, as you can see, and more importantly, it has some extra modifier keys. And from a usability perspective, at least if you use touch typing and if you use both of your hands all the time, it really makes sense. For example, to see, okay, you only have one spacebar here at the left, that's a different modifier key. And it comes with a program that I want to show you to just modify and change this. Because that's the cool thing, you can change each and every key on your keyboard. And the cool thing is, at least as far as I understand it, it's actually written on the keyboard. So then your keyboard sending different keys, and you don't have a problem with your operating system. I'm using Linux, that works pretty well with remapping keys in general. But that is just, you know, very nice. Also another question at this point, did you ever remap keys on your keyboard? Either diverging from your usual keyboard layout, like, you know, like for me, that's a German keyboard layout, which is unusable for programmers, or, you know, other ones that might not be as easy. So as you can see, I'm using a US English keyboard layout, and that's on purpose. So I always use, and also it has this layout, as you can see, so like a flat enter key, which I just prefer. But the cool thing now is, if you have some extra layers, you can actually program them, and I already changed them a lot. So for example, if you hit Modifier, which per default is like located here for me, well, not per default, I changed this as well. I changed these a bunch of times, just what made more sense for like the muscle memory. This really depends which keyboard you were used to before, especially with a laptop keyboard, right? Because if you use your thumb like more like this or this, it's very interesting to look into these things. And then you can say, okay, you have the cursor keys in this way, or you can actually, these are keyboard combinations, so you can switch the browser tabs and then have all of these, like home, delete. And so this, especially these ones, are take a little bit more of a time, and also the F keys to just get used to them. But then you're just also really fast because you're not switching your hands around to this extra block that here doesn't exist. But just, you need to get used to the extra modifier keys, and that's really cool. Also some function keys for just, like the, I don't know, media, or I'm switching like some language. I'm learning Russian, so that's a Cyrillic alphabet switch. And it even has a mouse simulation where you then, can have some left. Oh, here it doesn't work in this editor. If you have like a left, right, well, sorry, that doesn't work. Yeah, here we go. So you can, so you move your mouse with the keyboard, whether or not that makes sense, but it's just like funny, or to scroll at least, that's helpful. I think so. I found that's pretty cool. And actually what's interesting, I already really got used to the special modifier keys where you can say, okay, you go with the cursor keys or home and end. And also about this current situation, because usually I'm not a big fan of having a keyboard with a different layout where, you cannot have the same thing on your laptop, because obviously your laptop doesn't have all of these special modifier keys. But now, since I'm not traveling and I type on this keyboard all the time, I notice once I switch back from my laptop where I sit somewhere else, then I already miss them. So that's very interesting. And I think I'm just like a little bit more productive. So I really enjoy typing on that. That's the latest one that I'm use here. So besides the DAS keyboard and the Toper ones that I'm showing in the course. So that's another one that might be on your list. I think it looks also pretty cool. So that's, some toys for developers, right? And these are the updates of what I'm using for now. Okay, so let's go to the questions. How can you be productive as soon as possible when switching from one OS to another, Win to Mac? Oh yeah, that's a good question. Especially, I noticed switching to or from Mac is actually a big one. Why? Because of the keyboard usage, and not just all of these shortcuts, but also how the keyboard concept works, right? With the, what they even called, I always forget, like the control key and command key, right? Because they are pretty much switched, right? If I, for example, if I type something in an input field, and then if I say command left right arrow key, then I switch like word wise, or I can delete word wise if you have done that before. So in most of the input ones, and it's on a Mac, it's exactly the other key always. So I always like swap them. And if you have looked at your IDE keyboard mapping, like IntelliJ or something, they're totally different. And same in the browser. I'm already happy if I go for, at a user friend's MacBook, and then I can sort of use the browser correctly, and I hit the wrong or the correct key and not close the window accidentally or something like that. Yeah, that's a big one. Windows to Linux is kind of okay, I found, from the keyboard perspective. What I did, so I have some things that I really need in order to be productive. For example, like the keyboard layout, I remapped, even before I got this keyboard, I remapped caps lock to escape. So that's a big one. I use it for Vim and anything all the time. That's actually already in Windows. It's not easy at all. You have to do like a regex, a reg edit, system registry editor change with some administrator rights. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Or at least at that time when I did it with, was it Windows 7, I think. That was already somewhat challenging. What I did when I had to use Windows for my client work mostly, so when I was forced to use some computer, I just built myself a survival package of, shell emulation, Cygwin back then. For now, that should also be easier to use a proper shell with the subsystem for Linux, right? So shell is a big one because I use the command line a lot. Then the keyboard mapping, and then, well, the rest is kind of okay for me if I just like use programs, right? Because IntelliJ is literally the same. And all of, yeah, that's pretty much it, like just getting used to the different switching. Window manager is also sort of a big one for me because I can, like switch all of these workplaces with, well, it's super control and left right. I use i3 on Linux, and that doesn't work as nicely on, well, actually all the other window managers, if it's not a tiling one. So that's another big one. And yeah, to be productive as soon as possible, just try to, I would say, even hack your way around, or try to touch these points that are the biggest challenge for you, that you always, you notice that you make some mistakes because something's not available. And then every time when you're like, oh, this doesn't work, right? Then trying to find maybe a workaround for these ones at first. And for me, it was mostly hacky, but it was always possible, at least switching to Windows. I never was forced to use a Mac, so I never really had the issue for longer for this. For Mac, for me, the biggest issue is actually just the totally different keyboard concept, because everything else is actually similar-ish. For example, Unix-based shell, that's okay, and for now, Mac has a default Z shell, which I really enjoy, so that's fine for me personally too. But that was basically the biggest one. Also, Mac is more, at least that's my assumption, more mouse focused, right? You can do all of the things by a mouse with all of these like extra touchpad thingies. And yeah, that's basically what I would say the most, to just like trying to, either modify as much as possible so it's productive for you. And if you do it for a client work or you have to do it again, then it helps to first of all write it down, all the things that you changed, because then you easily forget them again. Or even craft some small package like a zip archive with all of the configuration files or something like that you have to change, or some tiny documentation where you just write a bunch of lines what to change. And that's what always helped me the most. But I have to say, it actually was pretty okay, although I modify a lot of things on the operating system. So when I was using a client computer, and if I could modify some things, then quite quickly, like in a few hours, you can be like very, very productive from my point of view. All right, let's see if we have some questions here as well. So let's jump into this first. And let's have a look into... Hi from Argentina as well, into that chat. Did you map i3 mod key to the physical mod key from your keyboard? For this question in the chat, whether I mapped the modifier key, no, I didn't. So mod key, this is a little bit redundant. Mod key here means the modifier layout of this very keyboard, which is just a different layer. But then you also send a different key. So the operating system, as far as I understood it, doesn't even notice. So if you press on this keyboard here, let me show it that way, if you press modifier here, and then, JK for left, right, or in my case, it's up and down, the same like the Vim movements, then the operating system already receives the cursor key, like arrow up and arrow down, and not like modifier. So modifier in this way is actually the super key. So what is called modifier in i3 is, well, you can select what you do, but typically it's Alt, Control, or Super or something like that. And I choose like Super, which is the Windows key for me, because also the Windows key is usually not used in any other program for some combination, because it's, well, the Windows key. And this works really well for my i3, and that is still the Windows key. So I did not actually have to change anything for this keyboard. If I just continue to use the Super key in Linux, and that's what I use in i3. Hope that answers your question. My current favorite productivity hack of 2020, log off Twitter. Yes, I fully agree. Thanks for mentioning that. So that is actually also a big one, because I noticed, well, with all of these news checkings, and especially in the beginning of the coronavirus, I caught myself checking this website with all of, the stats and numbers all the time, every day. And it just, it makes your sleep worse. It makes you being distracted. You cannot focus on what you want to do. Fully agree. Shut down Twitter, and I mean the same what I said quite a few times in the past. But now that was interesting. I noticed firsthand with myself, like, hey, you said this all the time. Now do it yourself. And yeah, it really helps. Good point. I actually deleted the Twitter app from my phone. I mean, I still use it in the browser, but then at least, if you walk around or go to the toilet or something, you're not checking this all the time. I fully agree, yeah. All right. I think there was another one. Yes. So in the Slido chat, let's go here. What do you think about Java mentoring? Is it effective approach of learning? Thanks. Yes. Mentoring as well as teaching, I think, is one of the best ways of learning in general, because first of all, it forces you to double check what you think you know. I noticed this many times when I was writing a blog post, that I just, you think you know something and, kind of works, and then you want to write it down and you double and triple check whether it's actually true because you're writing it down, right? I noticed the same when I was writing my book. It's like, you're really double checking your facts, whether it's actually the case because you want it to be correct. And it's not just, it's one thing if you say it, but then also if you teach it or if you write it down, then it really forces you to dig deeper. That's a great way. And mentoring as well, because it really gives you this perspective. It's a little bit like here, rubber ducking. So this is a duck that I got from the Joko conference, and you probably know this concept of rubber ducking, where you're trying to explain to the duck what's going on. And what it does, it forces you to take a step back and say, okay, what is actually the problem, or what do I want to tell somebody? And then it forces you again to, oh, wait a second, did I think of it right? To take a step back and look at the problem and maybe get to a new conclusion, or just encourage some thought in your head that you had before. So yes, I think it's these two things are one of the best ways to just learn and improve. So if you have some colleagues in your team who would like to be mentored, or even somebody who reached out to you to say, hey, can you help me with just this Java thing or a specific technology? Yes, it's a great way of learning. I can tell from experience, and that's something I can really recommend. All right, so I marked this one as answered. Do you believe a developer can be more productive by working fewer hours a day? Oh yes, absolutely. Actually, productive, I still don't know which word is best. I would call it effective, because it's like, you should think of it. I want to not necessarily work, more, or I want to get more done in a shorter amount of time, right? So if you write a program that does things for you, like automation, and then you execute the program and you refine the program that it works really well, then you can, do your job that otherwise would require 8 hours of manual work in a few seconds, and then you can lean back. Of course, you're more productive, and that pays off. By working fewer hours a day in general, it just depends where the ratio is, or where the golden sweet spot of this being effective, I guess, is, right? Because ultimately you can say, hey, it's great to automate, for example, and then I have more time doing even more other stuff, and then I can automate again, or I can try to be more productive and even more productive, and that doesn't it doesn't scale well. So I think what helps a lot is just trying to reflect a little bit, and also listening to your body and listening to your energy levels, to say, okay, how much time can I work a day before I literally get the strain of mental energy and then I cannot focus anymore? So it might be, if you have a really good focus without any distractions, I claim it's not more than 6 hours. If you really focus well on a thing, actually even after a few hours already you need a break, and then after, I don't know, 6 hours without any bigger break, then you're done, I would say, in a positive way, right? But that also should be enough, because if you work really productively, then you can achieve a lot in this amount of time. And I also, that's a personal opinion, think this 8 hours or 9 to 5 is totally overrated, and it's actually outdated. Came from a different different times, I claim. And yes, you can totally be more effective in terms of getting more done per time, and just achieving more by automating, and by trying to see if there is a more efficient way of doing things. So yes, by working few hours a day, totally. Just depends then what you spend your time with. Especially if you then say, oh, I work even less hours, but then I use the rest of the time for my work, for learning new things, right? Like reading documentation, reading a book, which then, and I said this also in the course, makes you more effective by just learning more about this topic, and then become more knowledgeable. and then also solving problems faster, right? Because ultimately, if we think about it, and I noticed this so many times, a computer and also all of the code we write, it's usually not a lot of code, right? So imagine if you had the perfect, I don't know, like perfect knowledge, like 100%, you never make mistakes, you get 100% right. You could write even the biggest applications in probably an hour, right? We don't write a lot of code, like it's not a lot to type or something like that, especially with today's high abstraction programming languages. But you have to know what to write, right? And the smallest change, the smallest different character can make a huge difference, and computers are ruthless, right? They don't care if there's a semicolon or not. If there's no semicolon, they won't execute it, right? Even if you swear at them. So, and then if you know what you're doing, you can be really, really productive and save a lot of time. And I think this is where this, famous 10x developer notation comes from. If you really know what you're doing, then, it's not only 10x, but maybe 10,000x. You can just save a lot of time by just saying, okay, it's like this, and then you're done, right? And maybe another person might struggle for hours and days to get the same thing done just because, you don't know what to do. So I think, yeah, there are a few things involved, but in general, it's definitely, productivity is not about like how much time you spend, at least not how much time you spend at the task per se, at executing the task. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Another live question: what tools do you use for this kind of live event? A bunch of tools. I actually, let me have a quick look at my blog. I have a video setup. I think that's the link. Chroma keying video setup that I use for all of these live events, and actually also for conference calls. You can have a look in my blog. I also updated it recently. Well, because of the situation, I updated it to a better camera and things like that. And that is just the streaming setup where I can also have, you see me picture in picture. So obviously I have a green screen and, for this background. And I use a second computer just to have a smoother streaming and recording so it doesn't affect the performance. And the rest is, just straightforward. I mean, it's YouTube live streaming. With a proper like streaming, I use OBS, which I think I explained somewhere here. Yes, Open Broadcaster software, which is like pretty much the de facto standard of everybody who does streaming these days, as far as I understood it. That sends the stream directly to YouTube. And then for the other things, well, you see, I use the Slido application just to do the Q&A and some polls and things like that. And I think that's all of the magic. Yes, so you can have a look at that. If you have some other questions, yeah, just post a follow-up question. All right, and let's have a look at another GitHub issue and the chat. So yeah, hi back to India and to Rio de Janeiro. Wow, we have pretty much the whole world here gathered, like from all parts of the world. That's super cool. Let me take the GitHub issue first. Sebastian, this week I rewatched your virtual jug presentation. Yes, thank you. Today you just mentioned a similar extension, but key jump for Chrome. That's interesting. It's number driven instead of letter driven. Okay. I have not tried this out, and it's the first time I see it. Key jump. I would say it's, oh god, I have to log in. Well, yeah, I can see it from the screenshot. So it basically, it has an overlay very similar to what I just showed you with just some numbers. If it works for you, that's great. It might be easier to have a look at. The way what I like about, I think it's surfing keys, what I'm using. So with this, let's show it here, with this F and then this overlay, it looks weirder in the beginning, because A, D, S, or, where does it come from? But I think it makes more sense. So that's just my first impression. I have not tried out this other tool. That it makes more sense because you're already on the same keyboard or on the same hand positions, right? Because you press F for this key overlay or whatever, and then A, D, S, F, Q, G. You see, it's all left hand, and it's all very close to where your hand was before. So kind of home row navigation, which I think really makes sense. And even more if you have a site with, let's see, with many links. Let me go back to this, and then it, even before it does anything else, it goes like two keys, both on also left hand. So where are we here? VD for this one. Why? Because then also instead of doing this, we can stay on the left hand, and then it's just quicker to switch. So I think that somewhat makes sense compared to that tool. I mean, if it works for you, that's great, right? It's just about what are you most familiar with. Just from my experience, I can tell this is the reason why I use these the current plugin. I think it was Surfing Keys or Vimeo. Have a look into that. But that's basically it. So these are my thoughts. But again, if it works for you, that's great. So just see how you can switch quickly. And also in general, if you use touch typing and if you're familiar with pressing all of the letter keys without looking, and of course here with pressing the digit keys without looking, which in the beginning actually for me was the bigger challenge. When I got a keyboard without descriptions, then it's really hard to, know which key to press and things like that. But then if that works for you, that's cool. All right. So, Sebastian from India, how do a beginner, so that's a chat question, should work towards being a Java champion? Sorry, it's big off topic. No, that's fine. Stay safe and take care. Yes, you too. A Java champion. So how I see it about, this Java champion then, and that's a title I got in 2016, is a Java champion in my eyes is somebody who drives the Java ecosystem forward, right? So especially outside of their job, because there are a lot of people, well, like me, who are also officially a developer advocate and who are kind of like, paid to educate about technology. But it's somebody who, makes the language somewhat bigger or drives it forward. It does not necessarily have to be on a technical level. Most Java champions, as far as I'm concerned, are somewhat, technical luminaries who are speakers, who share knowledge, who use it in their daily job. But there are also ones who get recognized for, organizing huge events or bringing like bigger groups of people, bigger communities together, or organizing, like Java user groups and conferences and all of the events that move the ecosystem also forward, right? And in general, I would see it, but that's more of a mindset. I wouldn't see it as a title per se in order to pursue the title for the sake of the title, right? But in terms of to say, okay, what do you feel or think about Java, right? Like, do you like the programming language? Do you like the ecosystem? Do you like the community? And if that is the case, then I would think of it okay, can I provide something that moves the world forward, right? So in the beginning, for example, I think one of my first open source contributions was like a JAX RS analyzer tool, which was a bytecode analyzer that was part of my computer science thesis. So it was actually on the background on the algorithm was quite some thinking involved. But then there was a practical appliance as well of saying, okay, you can generate documentation very easily from specific projects, which I actually used in my job. And then I was like, okay, if it helped me, and if it helps just one other person by sharing it, by making it open source, by writing about it, by recording a video or whatever, then it's already a win, right? So I would start from this perspective, not saying, okay, hey, how can I become a Java champion? I really want this title. It's more like about, hey, how can I move the ecosystem or the language forward? Can I contribute something? And I think especially most of us, or almost all of us, pretty much can contribute knowledge, right, in one way or another. If you're working on a problem, or like if you do this in your job and you learn something. So this is how what I often say, like for folks who want to start blogging, for example, or creating content. What did you learn, or what did help you, or what would have liked to have known in the beginning before you started out, that maybe then helps somebody else, right? And then just share it. And it doesn't have to be, the most cleverest thing in the world. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It can be a very, very basic thing, because we all know sometimes we struggle with the most basic things and most basic configuration, where it's just like some, entry or keystroke or whatever, and just go and share that. And then, just continue it and be consistent with it. Maybe you can speak at some occasion, like online, or once in-person events are possible again. And this is just like my point of view, like trying to see, okay, is there something where I can like add a value, like besides or beyond what is already there. So Ankur. I hope that answers this question a little bit, or at least that's my point of view. Hi, back to Medellin, Colombia. I miss Medellin and traveling. It's a beautiful city. I really enjoyed being there last year. So thanks, and thanks for watching. All right, and our 45 minutes are also almost over. I'm just checking the questions again. Yes, we have one more live question in the Slido app. Do you have some tips for those who are migrating their careers to the Java ecosystem? Well, yeah, that's also a little bit unrelated to this topic, but doesn't matter. Some tips. Oh, well, migrating their careers to the Java ecosystem, so which means they're not using Java right now. Well, basically, for the individual technologies, I would start with learning not only the syntax and specific frameworks, like, whether it's Jakarta or Spring, but learning the concepts, which really helps. And it actually doesn't matter which one you're using, because the concepts are very similar. For example, when we talk about, like how proxies work in Java, or how does the development model in both or more technologies works, where we do like declarative approaches with these Java annotations that we have, right? So you typically, you write your business logic in Java code, and then you sprinkle some annotations on it, and then almost like magic, your runtime will create some HTTP resource plus database transaction handling or whatever for you, and try to get familiar with that. Then I would have a look into the basic like tooling, what we use all the time for, like if you use Maven or Gradle, and then the tests, and basically try to find an, well, how could it say, like a works for you answer for all of the required concerns, right? So for example, when you say how to do testing, right? And there are a bunch of testing frameworks, and a lot of debates whether it's TestNG or JUnit or something else, and like which approach, but just trying to find, okay, what did I use before? Especially depends really whether you use the programming language that was type like a statically typed programming language, and is there something similar there, and where can continue from what I already know, because I'm pretty sure you already know like 80% that you need, right? Like from the actual concepts and the actual knowledge. The rest is just syntax and slightly different, but you will also have some type of tests. You will also do some type of deployment, some type of build, and all these things, and then see, okay, what do I need here and what makes sense. I'm actually just thinking whether there's some like really from the bottom guideline to do pretty much like state-of-the-art getting started with these technologies. I'm just thinking about, I did a video course on learning Java EE, which was Java EE 8 back then, but it's still pretty much like similar. If you, for example, want to have a look into Quarkus, Quarkus.io, that's also an interesting technology, and I'm saying this because of the guides, so it has like like helpful guides as well, or Open Liberty, which I think has very nice interactive guides. So this is one example for actually a runtime about Jakarta, but it's not even about the runtime. The guides are actually very nice as well, and they're some of them are interactive where you can try it out in the browser. Then something like getting started creating a RESTful web service and things like that in Java, and then how to do build, how to do testing, and all of these things from the bottom. And I think a lot of that will be familiar to you. If you're a programmer, right, you've probably written some tests, you have developed some things, and then I would take it from there. So I would say these are some of my tips. Other than that, like for this general question. All right, let's take this one more question in GitHub. Sebastian, in my experience, most of the devs use the run mode when they're programming and test their apps, but I prefer using the debug mode. I think the mode is better because it gives a modify the code, rerun, continue restarting test case again. What's your opinion about it? Right. So I think you're talking about probably the Java, the IDE run mode, right? Like, or actually if you run from the command line, but typically do something like Java, then versus a -x debug basically under the hood. I partly agree. What it really depends on the technology, what makes sense here. So for example, if I use like this Quarkus or this OpenLiberty are both really good examples because both come with a dev mode for a development mode that starts up. Both of them are enterprise runtimes, right? So that starts up the runtime in a development mode where it listens to code changes, and it also comes with a debug attached, so you can attach a debugger. It's listening to the debug port, and then you can hot debug and do the hot reload and all these things as well, which is really helpful. So that's mostly what I'm doing on the enterprise side while developing these days. And I have to say I agree also on the debug mode when I write standalone applications or even things like JavaFX applications like desktop apps written in Java. Why? Because of the hot reload, especially in IntelliJ. That's what I use. It works really well. To say, okay, if like you describe it, basically you modify the code and then you press, I think, Control Alt F9 or something like that, or Control F9 to just rebuild, and then it says, okay, reload two classes, and in a lot of cases that already is your reload and you're done, which is faster. So I would say it depends on your technology. In general, that's also what I said in the course. Trying to find some way that gives you the shortest turnaround, right? Like the shortest waiting time, whatever that is. If it's the hot reload mode of Quarkus, or this plugin of OpenLiberty, or your debug mode in a standalone Java app, or some different model, then I would use that simply because of the waiting time, right? I don't want to wait even just a few seconds. So I fully agree with you, without restarting and rebuilding, which always takes a few seconds. So I'm actually also a big fan of, like doing a debug or just doing a mode in this way. Sometimes debug is a little bit slower, actually, just in general, or actually always slower. I don't know too much about the internals, but because of the way how it operates and all of these breakpoints that it could attach. But if it works for you, yes, I fully agree. But in general, try to find a way where you can get as little of a turnarounds as possible. All right, and let's have one more look into the chat. Yes, so thanks everybody for joining. We got one more question in the Slido. How do you maintain your website? Sebastian-Dashner.com. So it actually changed a few times. So I have a few sites available. I have my blog, which is actually, I wrote about this a few times. I write my blog posts in ASCII-Doc, and then I have some application that just processes them. In general, it's some form of static code generator that generates HTML, and that is served. In my websites, it's actually HTML code. Or just HTML resources, because I literally very rarely change them, and that's served in my case just via static website. So it's in my case very basic. I have a Git repository where all of my resources reside, and then I have some script, of course, automation, right, that just redeploys it if I change something, and that's pretty much it. So for the website, it's very basic. For the blog, actually, if you're interested in that, I can. Yeah, that was quite a while ago that I did something, ASCII blog, about it. So that is, I think this is pretty much older. Yeah, you see, from 2015. And I have something that's on GitHub. I think GitHub, it's even a question whether that's up to date, but that was basically, well, for, I would say, historical reasons, it's a Java EE application. Right now, I might be able even to replace it with fully static. It does some calculations and statistics in the background as well. But that's basically it. It connects to Git and ASCII-Doc. But what I do, as a takeaway, I write my blog posts in ASCII-Doc because that's just, or in a plain text documentation language, because that's just simpler. And then I have some automatic routine how to reload it. And I would say that's the most important part of the answer, right? What you exactly use, it really doesn't matter as long as you can automate. So that's what I use, but there are tons of static code generators and website generators out there. And I think, yeah, that's not even, I think, up to date, this one. So I had a few blog posts in the past. You might have a look into them just for the idea what I did, but the actual, I think the current here implementation differs a bit. But in general, just, trying to automate, trying to be more effective by doing that. All right, then I would say, let's have a last look. No updates here. updates here, then I hope this was interesting for you. Thanks everybody for joining and for well, asking a lot of questions. And I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And also during these times, I hope you're all staying safe and yeah, trying to stay productive, especially when coding. I think coding is a very nice distraction, and that distracts us from the crazy world, and that gets us into an enjoyable flow state where we can enjoy our work. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. Stay safe and bye.